Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullins, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
Thank you, Ronnie, and thank you all for having me here. When I was a kid, I would be with the guy that was kind of Jack Crimmerman. Jack, our visitor from out of town. My dad, as some of you remember, ran Claitor's law books, and the lawyers definitely remember him from the old days. And then we had some other practice, but what we did was we bought and sold used law book libraries all over the country. So in the summer, I'd get in the truck with him, and we'd go to Beaumont and Abilene and whatever. But he always made the Rotary meeting, and we came home with those little flags from being the guy from the furthest away. So I'm not a member of Rotary, but I've been a long-time supporter and made a lot of trips to the Rotary functions, and you do very good work, and it's great to see all my different friends here. I can say, when I was going with my dad as a kid, and I would look out there weren't any women in the group. So it's great to see that composition has changed quite a bit. I also got my note when I sat down that basically said, don't go over your time limit, we'll cut you off. I usually start these things off with a little bit of a joke, and I accidentally picked up the joke that I had for the Baton Rouge Roundtable. So I'm gonna have to wing it with a different joke. So a man takes a balloon ride at a local county fair, and a fierce wind suddenly picks up and kicks the balloon off the site, and the balloon comes down in a farmer's field. The man's left with no clue of how far he's flown or where he is, and he sees a gentleman walking down the lane, and he hollers out to him, "Excuse me, sir, can you tell me where I am?" And the guy looks at him and says, "Well, you're in a down balloon in a farmer's field." The guy looks at him and goes, "You must be from the Revenue Estimating Conference." The guy in the balloon says, "How could you possibly know that?" And the balloonist says, "Well, everything you've told me is absolutely correct, but of no use to me." The economist looks at the guy in the balloon and says, "Well, you must be a legislator." And the balloonist says, "Well, how'd you know that?" And the economist replies, because you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, and you're exactly where you were 10 minutes ago, but somehow now it's my fault." So I won't use that one at the round table. They like a little bit more haughty joke over there. So it's been my pleasure to be in the legislature, and I represent a lot of you. I look around and see my friends of many, many years and my friends of a few years. In the 9 years that I've been since 2009, when I entered the legislature, when Senator Cassidy was elected, I've brought 296 instruments, over 10 regular sessions, 2 organizational sessions, 8 extraordinary sessions. 83 of my bills were signed by the governor and became law, and 1 constitutional amendment passed. And so it's been great, and I've enjoyed it, and thank you for giving me the privilege of serving you all. And I'm term limited, and like Cincinnati from way back when, he went home to the farm and was happy there, and I'm looking forward to returning to the practice of law full time. But it has been an honor, and I've really enjoyed what I've done. Most of you have said I've been satisfied with what you've done, but a couple of you said, no, Dan, we're happy to see you go anyway. It's our duty as good citizens to study the folks that are running and support people that we think will do a good job. So thank you for having me. What I wanted to visit about was criminal justice reinvestment, and that was a kind of a weird thing, and I know a lot of you are engaged in it, but when does business come out and say, I want to be engaged in criminal justice reinvestment? Hadn't really happened before. And a lot of your membership and your friends were down at the legislature saying, I want to be involved in this. A lot of people call it criminal justice reform. I never use that word. I always said it's criminal justice reinvestment, in that what it's about is you check your portfolio and you see how your portfolio is performing, and if you have to adjust it and reinvest in other things, you do that. So I want to talk about how that's impacted the budget, and then what it actually was, and then I want to talk about whatever you want to talk about. So most of us are aware that the budget is about $31 billion, B with a billion, that about half of it goes to Department of Health and Hospitals, and that we have all that, and that of the other half, about half of that goes to K through 12 and higher ed. And so there's really not that big of a slice that we fool with in the legislature, and that most of it's dedicated. So the legislature, I'm going to talk about the 2019 fiscal year, total budget $30.7 billion. The legislature met 4 times to accomplish final passage of the expenditure and revenue proposals, once in regular session, once before the regular session, and 2 times after the regular session. The legislature allowed the 1 penny sales tax to expire on July 1 and replaced it with a 0.45% sales tax. And a lot of people were frustrated with the foolishness that went along with just where that was going to end, but everybody knew how that was going to end, and eventually that's where it did end. Passage of the sales tax allowed the legislature to maintain a budget that did not exceed the cost of a standstill budget, thereby allowing for the full funding of TOPS, full funding of the MFP, no reductions to higher education, and funding of critical healthcare services, like keeping the public-private partnership here with the Lady of the Lake in Baton Rouge operating. The allocation of the state general fund dollars, it was allocated with 49% going to education, 28% to health and children and family services, general government 9%, public safety 6%, non-appropriated requirement 6%, judicial and legislative branch 2%. Hey Guy gave me an opportunity to put together some visuals, and so I brought them. The budget. What's left after health care, and what we get to fool with. He did give me an opportunity to do a PowerPoint, but I got caught up on some other things, and I apologize. But sometimes people use this as their display, 10 and 5 and things like that. But the legislature provided, and a lot of people are concerned about this, the legislature provided for, in the last session, the supplemental appropriation bill, not the regular supplemental bill, but to the actual fiscal bill, some things that dealt with criminal justice reform, being corrections, $16 million going to sheriff housing and youth services. And that was predicated on the Revenue Estimating Conference recognizing some money. And you saw where the Revenue Estimating Conference couldn't figure out what they wanted to agree on, and you can make up your own mind on the politics of what was going on there. But the short version is there's been no recognition of the additional revenue that is absolutely there. And so that means that certain things aren't being funded. On the surface, you go, well, maybe we're talking about $30 million and stuff, and it's not all that important that there be an agreement there. But one of the things that's coming out in that process that people are going, oh, wait a minute, is that when we do next year's budget, which is the governor's going to have to come out with it here shortly, it's not going to have the self-generated component to it. So there's going to be a $7 billion hole in the budget when the governor presents his budget on February 22nd, because we haven't recognized that it was there. It's a fictitious thing. We know that it's going to be there, but the governor's still going to have to put together a budget that says it's not there because we haven't recognized it in the revenue estimating conference. And so the politics of that will be very interesting, in that who puts what particular spin on it. But remember that you heard it here, that it's all going to be okay, that it's going to have to be recognized, and that it's perhaps some people just wasting our time as we get to the final product. But that'll be here soon enough, and that'll be interesting things for us to talk about. So there is a $308 million surplus, even when you figure oil very low. And the older members of our group, myself included in that older member, I did shave my beard to look a little bit younger. Just a suggestion. So at any rate, I was looking at what that $308 million would do, and it's spoken for in a large part in that $77 million would have to go into the rainy day fund, 25%. When I sat on the retirement committee, and anybody ever been to the retirement committee here? All right, one, maybe two. And most people don't pay any attention to it, what's going on there, but that is the UAL, this unfunded accrued liability, is a huge glacier that is coming in to crash our budget. And when we were talking about how you have to do backfill, and when we have a surplus, as a freshman legislator, I became frightened of that glacier. We made a adjustment to surpluses where 10% has to go toward the unfunded accrued liability when we have a surplus. So you got to fill up the rainy day fund, you got to spend 10% toward the UAL, and the governor has said he'd like to spend $55 million on coastal and levees, so there's $145 million that there'll be a fight over as it relates to what to do with the rest. So just kind of gets that backdrop, and I know you may have some other questions about the budget. I'm going to now kind of take a turn into the criminal justice reform side of things. So I think you all heard the stats previously that prior to this justice reinvestment stuff, that Louisiana led the nation in incarceration. Louisiana led the free world in incarceration. They always talk about us being last and stuff. Anyway, we were also led the not free world in incarceration. We incarcerated per capita more than anybody else in the entire world. And turns out that we weren't particularly proud of that. And one of the things that we did when we were looking at that, and I would ask this question, and people didn't particularly like me to ask this question, is how much justice can you afford? People say, Dan, you know that you don't put a dollar figure on that. I said, yes, we put a dollar figure on everything in government. How much justice can you afford? And we had a big discussion about it, but hopefully none of you have too much experience with this, so just a little bit of background. And these are round numbers. To keep somebody at Angola costs about $60 a day when you look at all of it. To keep somebody at your local sheriff's jail cost about $30 a day. The sheriffs, when we got too full in the state penitentiaries, said, well, heck, we can hold those guys for you, and you pay us some money, and I don't know, maybe my slow brother-in-law is going to be able to have a job over there too. And so we've created a big complex within the sheriff system through no fault of their own. The sheriffs didn't create it, we created it, as far as they have a dependency upon local housing of criminals. So, I mean, that's just a fact. I'm not pulling your leg on that, and we could talk about that more if you want to when we get there. But how much justice can you afford? Pew Charitable folks teamed up with, of all people, the Koch brothers, and then everything in between. So we had Pew, and I'm holding on the left side for them, and Koch over here, and a ton of people in between showed up in Louisiana and said, hey, you know, we'll give you some resources and help you with research. Oh, I'm not following. The high guy told me don't talk away from the mic. Anyway, I'm trying to get it in there. They showed up in Louisiana, had resources, stats, and said, We'll help you with some of these things if you want to talk about it. As legislators, we're not always particularly brave on these issues as it relates to criminal justice reinvestment, because everybody that's running for office can see that ad that says, Dan Claitor's soft on crime. They don't want that. I'm an old prosecutor. I lock people up for life. That's what I did. But we had to ask the question, how much justice can you afford? I gave you what the benchmarks are, $60 and $30. And we dug down into what people could tolerate. And basically, we looked at the different classes of criminals. Violent criminals, nobody particularly brave enough to deal with that issue. Take that off the table. Sexual predators, absolutely not. Not going to talk about them. Take that off the table. Dope? Yeah, let's talk about dope. Let's talk about the users and the sellers, and property-related issues, absolutely. Let's talk about thieves and people that do fraud and things of that sort. When you get sentenced, what happens, you get a state sentence. They have a thing called good time that applies to your sentence. Anybody familiar with what that is? So you get a good time calculation. The purpose behind good time is if I send you to jail, then I'm going to give you a 10-year sentence. What motivation do you have to be a good prisoner? Maybe not that much, but if you're earning good time credits by walking the line, not stabbing your neighbor, getting a GED, and things that you would ordinarily expect in normal life, you earn good time credits. Good time credits vary all over the place, but in the federal system, they're about 85%. And they say they don't have good time, but 85% of your sentence in the federal system, if you're going to do 15 days less every 100, people are very aware of that. So in our system, what happens is for these class of people that we were talking about, dope fiends and thieves, if you're not going to have a particularly big exposure, and you say instead of getting 75% good time, if you're a good boy or girl, and we got plenty of ladies in prison these days, that stat has been going up consistently, we're going to reduce the rate of how long you are in jail on the good time thing. So I don't like the aspect of it that the public doesn't really get or understand what's going on every time. As far as the guy got 10 years, I thought he was going to get 10 years. Good time applies to that. It happens everywhere. It's not something new that we just made up in Louisiana. It happens in every state. They have some version of that, and they have it in the federal system. But just to be clear, for those classes of criminals, we lowered the good time rate, and as you would expect, that reduces your prison population. And so the good time calculation has been reduced on those classes of folks. Also, the last time that you probably never fooled with this, but we had a bazillion classes of theft in Louisiana. You have theft of crawfish, theft of cattle, theft of Jim's electronic devices. We have all kind of different thefts, and the threshold was very low, $500. They were set back in the 60s. So if that's a misdemeanor below that and you lift the cap up higher, you're going to have fewer people being sentenced on felonies. And so just making sure you understand what happened, we raised the threshold on these different things, resulting in fewer people being exposed to felonies. We also said, hey, if you do these particular classes and try to make yourself a better person, we'll calculate some good time differently on you. And so what has the result been? These watches are great. You can hang up the phone while you're giving a speech. So these are the stats that we have. The population decreased for calendar year 2018 from 33,739 prisoners. That's how many people we got in prison in Louisiana, and we got about 4.5 million people, so that's a lot of people. Decreased from 33,739 to 397. The population has decreased 20% from its peak in May 2012. In May 2012, we had 40,583 people in prison in Louisiana. The population has decreased by 3,564, or 9.9%, since the implementation of criminal justice reinvestment. So last calendar year, we're just getting started. What our saving was $12.2 million. You say, Dan, $12.2 million in a $31 billion budget, you hadn't done anything. Well, that's real money. You know, $12 million is a lot of money. And we've made some real improvements with that. Representative Leger from New Orleans, I don't know if many of you know Walt, but Walt said this thing is cockeyed. Said, hey, you know, we're going to get these savings. You've talked about reinvestment, but I don't trust us, so we're going to have a bill that says 70% of it gets plowed back in of the savings. And everybody said, what? I'm a politician. You're not going to trust me? And so that bill passed pretty easily, and so 70% has to be reinvested. So that $12 million is more than what was expected, actually. And then we had a much more conservative number figured on that. And for FY19, we're on track for a savings of $15.92 million. And I don't know how closely you've been watching it locally as far as where the dollars have ended up going, but Louisiana, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and Caddo have gotten the lion's share of these numbers, as you would expect, in that more people, more crime. And I'm looking for some of these numbers on what happened locally. So the numbers have been reinvested in programs to help people make the transition. If you've ever been to the parish prison where these local guys are housed, you would go, what's happening here? And it's just warehousing. Here's your ham sandwich, and it's warehousing. And a lot of people would say, yeah, that's good. Just give them a ham sandwich, and I don't care. But when they get released into your neighborhood, they're kind of like, maybe it would help if they had some sort of skill and had some life lesson opportunities, or maybe if they just got a little bit of religion while they were in the prison. Where turns out that I'm pretty sure that Jesus lives over at the prison, because almost everybody has found him there. Okay, I'll keep going. That's just an amen, thank you. So East Baton Rouge Parish received $1.1 million of this allocation, and a lot of it's going to the establishment of a family justice center in East Baton Rouge, criminal reparations fund, child predator technology, and a clerk system to improve that. So I could talk further on that. I'm not sure where I am on my time. I have my little card that says that I'll be cut off promptly. So I think that's given you a background of how it's working. We have the different classes of prisoners. We've got the cost of state in locals. We've created a system where the locals are dependent upon that money, the sheriffs are. We've got to figure out a fair way to wean them off of that money. You've got different classes of prisoners that create a different risk. We use a lot of different tools to do that. On the back end, once they get out of jail, one of the things that's happening on the parole side of things, in the probation side of things, we've instituted a system on the probationers that limits probation to essentially 3 years unless the judge says, hey, this dude is not getting it, and I absolutely have to extend it. But if they hit the certain benchmarks on the probation, they also get out there. But we have some life lessons opportunities for them there. On parole, people kind of get that confused. You become parole eligible. That doesn't mean you're getting out. It means that you're going before the parole board, and they're going to take a look at you and decide whether you're going to get out. One of the ones that a lot of people got fired up about is, hey, you're paroling murderers. What's going on with that? There is a a small slice of violent criminals, including murderers, that anybody heard about that great hospice program that they got at Angola? We have one of the best hospice programs around at Angola, but you and I as taxpayers are paying that out of the general fund for all their services and everything that's happened there. If you are completely, I don't know the medical term, but I'm going to use a layman's term, if you're completely gorked out and not a danger to anybody, why not let them go to Medicaid in a private hospital where we're going to get a whole different drawdown on that? But that was one of the more controversial things that people say, I don't want somebody that's comatose coming out of Angola. He might suddenly wake up and strangle a bunch of people all over again. So just giving you the background on that, and happy to try to answer questions on that. But it's a difficult thing. Your legislators that voted for that, it wasn't easy for those that are coming back. They tried hard to be brave on this, and it'd be a whole lot easier for them just to say, hell no, I'm not doing that. So consider that when they come up for re-election. He was before you.
What's the status of mandatory minimum sentences, and how does that factor into all that?
Okay, so mandatory minimum is I don't trust the judge to do the right thing. Therefore, as a legislature, I'm going to put a mandatory minimum. You got to do 10 years on certain crimes, or 5 years on certain crimes. There's a discussion about that, but since they generally fall on violent crimes, everybody's a little bit faint-hearted when they start dealing with that because they don't want to be the guy that said, hey, I got rid of mandatory minimum for this or that. I prosecuted a lot of heroin distribution cases as a prosecutor. I sent people away to jail for life. I struggled very hard with when they were trying to say it shouldn't be a life sentence anymore. I said, you were giving people a life sentence of dependency on heroin. Why shouldn't they have it? Well, I wasn't considering completely who's paying the ticket on that and how long does it take before we've gotten a return on it. One of the things I didn't talk to you about that was interesting, but it makes sense to you. People don't particularly care for the term too much, but there's a criminal menopause that goes on at about age 40. People don't want to go back to jail again, and so they're pretty good. So when a prisoner gets to age 40, they're a low-risk person. You can, whatever they did before, however bad or good it was, they're probably not going back and going to work hard to be a good citizen. So on mandatory minimums, unfortunately, the answer is nothing. I'm the chairman of Jude C. When somebody tries to bring a new mandatory minimum, I do my best to help them understand that I don't think it's a great idea, that the judge ought to have the discretion to give what he thinks appropriate. So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just a quick question about the East Baton Rouge Parish Prison. The conditions there are pretty deplorable. Any of the surplus going back into that facility? And it seems to me that the people that work there are doing what they can with very limited funds, but the conditions are very, very poor.
I don't disagree with you that they're deplorable, but these are coming back for programs as opposed to capital outlay. So as far as making a real change there on the structures, I don't see that happening out of this money. Yes, ma'am.
Who makes the decision as to what programs that money goes into?
So there's Criminal Justice Reinvestment Board that looks at the different proposals. They actually do a RFP, request for proposals. They come and they defend these different things, and then ultimately there's some recommendations, but the legislature and the governor and the Commission on Law Enforcement makes some choices on that. So it's spread around. But right, keep an eye on who's making the decision, 100%. Barbara?
Even with the same question, what happens to the other 30%?
Goes into the state general fund and we spend it.
General fund.
Yep. Well, yeah, right. And it's gone, but maybe it shows up in tops. You know, maybe it shows up in something you like. Yes, ma'am.
Would you give us your take on the partisanship in the legislature and its effects?
Okay. So when it's not been long, I got elected in '09, and when I showed up there, I registered as a Republican in 1979 when there weren't a whole bunch of Republicans. When I came to the legislature, I wasn't sure who was a Republican and who was a Democrat, as far as we had big lane in the middle of people that just wanted to do what people had asked them to do, as far as let's make government work and stay out of our lives. On the guys that are on the far right and the guys that are on the far left, they were pretty easy to identify. My mama and grandmother taught me to be respectful of other people's ideas and let them say what they want to say. So I've tried hard to not be partisan, but if I don't like your idea, I'm going to test you on whether it stands up or not. So sometimes everybody in here, who almost all of them are my constituents, they expect me to make a rational argument, not to say you're a nincompoop because you're in the other party. So, but they have a lot that do that. It's getting worse. Looks like I'm getting the thing. So, thank you.
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.